He had his Dick's Cafe people, and he had his high school people, and he had his Arizona Strip people, and his Lions Club people, and everybody has a story of an interaction.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a podcast brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation and hosted by noted writer Lyman Hafen, who has chronicled the stories, culture, and character of Utah's Dixie for more than 40 years. We'd like to invite our listeners to attend our annual benefit dinner for the Doc Booth Foundation on April 25th, 2026 at 6 p.m. at the Dixie Convention Center. This year, we're honoring Ted Spilsbury, who has been a beloved pillar in this community. If you can attend or would like to donate, you can buy tickets at docboothfoundation.org. Please plan on joining us.
Well, it's another one of those amazing days in Utah's Dixie. It's still supposed to be winter, I guess, but it's beautiful. We're all in short sleeves here in the studio, and we're all just soaking up the sun today. I am in the studio today soaking up the Dixie spirit with three wonderful, amazing people. And I've been so looking forward to this opportunity to visit with Mandy Mathis and with Jay Andrus and with Doug Drake. And we're going to talk today about the Mathis family. We're going to talk in particular about Mandy's father, Wally, a legendary figure of Dixie High School and one of the great people of Dixie. And as we do so, I think we're going to really refine that whole definition of the Dixie spirit, because that's what I'm feeling in this room right now. And Mandy, it's so good to have you here and appreciate you being here. And I thought maybe we could start out by talking a bit about the Mathis family and that story and how it is that the Mathis family is here in St. George.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank you for representing the Mathis family in this project, and it's been great hearing all the other stories that you've done, and it's been fantastic, and I know so many people enjoy it. I'm with some of my heroes in this room, so I appreciate that very much. But to your question of how the Mathis family got to St. George, I was able to read up a little bit about this, and it's been fun to read the family history because I see so many characteristics of my dad and my grandpa as I go back generations, and they tell the stories of generations that are farther removed from me and how they interacted with people and circumstance, and to see how that came out generations down. And so I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm representing my family and a lot of friends, so I appreciate it. But we go back to Switzerland, and my great-grandparents were both orphans, and they married, and he became a shoemaker. And in Zurich, there was a shoe factory, and he actually started to do very well for himself in those circumstances, and that was the Briner side. And after he became a little bit more financially stable, they moved to a little suburb of Zurich. It was called Wiedeken. And they moved to the farm right next to Johannes Mathis, my other great side. And so they got to know each other in that realm of being neighbors, and they also went to the same church, a church that I've had the opportunity to visit. My friends Nate and Heather Wells took me back to the homeland, and we were able to see the St. Peter's Church that was in Zurich and get a feel for it. And it must have been a call from God for them to leave, because I don't know why anyone else would, because that is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, Switzerland, and just beautiful. So the young missionaries, 1847, big year in Utah, but also in Switzerland, that they're becoming a little bit more open to new religion. And the first LDS missionaries get there in about 1850, and he starts to teach, and he taught my great-great-grandparents, and they had kids that were about the same age. And so John Mathis and Barbara Briner and her brother Casper, They were all baptized, all converted, and they were the ones that were elected to go across the plains and go to Utah, to Zion, and see what it was like, and then send for the family. And they were all in their early to mid-20s during this time. So they were just sent as brother and sister and as friend of the family. But apparently a romance ensued that later on John and Barbara were married, and they had 10 kids. 5 of them lost at a young age. 1 lost a little bit older, so they lost 6 of their 10 kids. And their last child was Wallace Brigham Mathis, who was my great-grandpa. And he was born in 1877, and he had his family that took over the family home in St. George that's still standing, and the house that my parents built was his stockyard. They'd built, when you came to St. George, you got called to St. George, you got lots, and they traded lots so they could have Lot 5 and Lot 6 next to each other so that they could have their cattle right next to them.
And that's on First South?
It is on 3rd West and 2nd South.
2nd South, yeah. And so it's just west of the library?
West.
And south. So I'm thinking of where your Grandpa Reed.
Yeah, he was on First South.
Yeah. But you're describing the lot, a block south of that.
The first family home.
Okay.
A big adobe home that was there.
And it's still there.
It's still there.
And it was Wallace Mathis.
It was John Mathis's, and then Wallace Brigham took it over with his parents, and
Wow.
it's nice to see it still there.
That is really neat.
So they went to Salt Lake initially, and then they got called to St. George in that first group in 1861 and had the hardships of moving to a desert. I've always admired that they were able to go from Switzerland to St. George in the different climate and be able to acclimate to that. It's different being a gardener in Switzerland and raising crops in St. George.
And the big difference is there's water in Switzerland.
Right. And he was part of the water board initially when they first started doing water lots, and then my grandpa was on the water board for over 70 years, my Grandpa Reed. So my grandpa's famous saying is, anyone who complains about rain in St. George is a newcomer or a darn fool.
And maybe you can give us some context when you just said darn, but what did he really say?
So
we know what he really said.
We know what he really said.
And we're also going to assume every time you say darn or heck that
I'm
there
translating
are other words being used there.
I'm translating.
So, Mandy, the Mathis family came to southern Utah. Most of those Swiss families went to Santa Clara. How is it that John and Wallace were in St. George?
I think the language barrier is what they spoke Swiss German, and they said when they first came, they were the only ones that they first were in Lehigh for a little bit and didn't really have a connection language-wise. The missionary that baptized them got called to Las Vegas, and so he couldn't be there to translate. Then they went to Plain City, Utah. But you're right, most of them went to Santa Clara, but they called it the Swiss block, that there was 5 or 6 families that ended up in that same area that spoke that German and planted their roots together.
That is so fascinating to think about. In those earliest days of St. George, there was a Swiss block. There were probably other little enclaves around town with different people from different places that kind of congregated together.
That they could communicate, and so to be able to have that type of community, and they later learned the language, and their younger kids would learn English much better. But those initial converts and people that was their lot in life.
So take us from the first Mathis all the way down to your generation.
So there's Wallace Brigham was my great-grandpa, and then he had my Grandpa Reed. It was one of his sons, and I know we both have an affection for my Grandpa Reed. I'm a very devout Christian, but if I didn't worship Jesus, I would have worshipped Reed. I think he's the second greatest man to walk the earth, and it was a close second. I always thought he was right in Jesus' rearview mirror. And
I've got a question for you. How does that relate to W.W. Mathis that lived across the street from you on the corner? And then Gordon Mathis was my uncle. Are they the same family then?
Yep. So WB was my grandpa's dad, and Gordon was his brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that
So Gordon and Reed, brothers. And that's always been a really interesting contrast to me because Gordon was a local businessman, very much involved in business in town, whereas Reed was a cowboy out on the strip. Brothers, but quite an interesting.
One probably felt a little more comfortable with people, and one felt a little more comfortable with cows, and they found their spots.
And they were both very successful.
Well, and Gordon ran the Mathis Market right there next to the old post office on Tabernacle. And then he married my dad's sister. So we're related.
That's I knew you were good stuff.
This is Jay talking here. We'll keep this going as a discussion here. This is really great. It's amazing to think, though, because that part of town, that was the nucleus of the original St. George, right there.
And their connections with people, and what they became very good with the agriculture, and that's where they ended up. They bought farmland over in Green Valley, where Mathis Park is, where that was, and then north up to that church on 100 North and Son of Sunbrook. They always had a family farm there. For when I was a kid, we'd go to that farm, raised alfalfa and hay.
That's awesome. My goodness. Well, you mentioned your grandpa Reed. We're working our way down to your dad, Wally.
Yeah, no, you spend all the time you want.
We're going to get there. But his name, your dad's name would have been Wallace.
Wallace Reed.
He went by Wally. But your great-grandpa, did he go by Wally as well?
Wally B.
Wally B.
Yep.
I remember my dad talking about Wally B. Mathis. So that ties that all together. That's pretty awesome. Well, I don't want to interject too much here, but when I was 14 years old and your family was in a situation out on the strip where things needed to change and the original Parashant Ranch changed hands, though. Your family still has that beautiful place and private ground out there, but the grazing was purchased by the Gubler and Fry families. And when I was 14, about the time I was supposed to be playing JV football for Doug Drake here, your grandpa put together a kind of a group of mercenary cowboys to go out into Twin Canyon and bring the wild cattle out of Twin Canyon. And my dad was one of the first ones to sign up for that. And I was just old enough to be able to go too, because I'd been learning how to rope out at the posse grounds.
Oh, yeah.
Doug's brother, Tom, was teaching me how to rope. And so I got to go on that trip. And it was the ultimate coming-of-age experience for me to spend 3 days with your Grandpa Reed. I still can't really put my arms around what that experience was. It was amazing. And to see him operate, he would have been in his mid-60s at that time. And he was roping, he was branding, he was doing everything. And everyone else there was just in awe of him. And I was in awe of how he moved about, just doing efficiently and effectively and confidently, doing everything. And I remember I actually got to rope one of those wild cows, and I got him forked to a tree, and your grandpa hopped off and tied the legs and started a fire and took 2 rings off his saddle, 2 iron rings. And I'm going, what is that? And my Uncle Eldon says, you don't know what that is, Lyman? He said, those are running irons. That's how you brand on the open range. And he put those irons in the fire. And then when they were flaming red, he put the sticks between the iron, and then he put the VT on that wild cow that I drove. And I will never forget that. And that's when you mentioned how much you admired your grandpa. I have that same kind of admiration for a man that was so amazing. Anyway, Mandy. So we've got your Grandpa Reed, and as Jay mentioned, his brother Gordon, and both of them were stalwarts in the community in their own way. And I grew up next door to the Mathis family, to Dick Mathis family, and what an awesome heritage they have with the savings and loan, and the St. George Savings and Loan, and all of those things. But it just strikes me as we're talking how much this family has meant to this community.
And the community's meant a lot to them. Talking to my dad and my grandpa, I never understood that as a little kid when they would make connections of like, oh, that's so-and-so's kid, or I know their dad, or what. And now I'm getting to the age when I'm asking people who their parents are, and I start to get it now. I start to get why those connections are important. But you grow up in a community. My tax guy, Josh Savage, I was friends with him in elementary school. And so you think, and you've got these long-term relationships, and my dad taught me he knew everybody. And then you have the privilege and the burden of being Wally's daughter or being Wally's kid. There's things that come with that.
Well, and the main reason we got together today was to talk about your dad, to remember his impact in this community. And that impact is broad, but it's also individual, because everyone who had a class with him or was on a team that he coached or that was involved with him as a fellow educator, everyone has their individual memories and special moments. But maybe what we ought to do here is jump off to Jay and Doug for a minute, because these two men were both contemporaries of your dad, teachers. Jay was a legendary teacher at Dixie High School, as well as Doug, and coaches and all the awesome things you did. But a big part of your career was interacting with Wally Mathis. Maybe we could have you share some of your memories and thoughts.
Well, interrupt whatever you'd like, but my sister Dion was the same age as Wally, and Suzette said that Wally used to call Dion Bucket, but we didn't know why. But everybody, I guess they had a lot of nicknames back then, and then they dated a little bit, so Wally's been in our family to the point where when my sister Dion married Brent Snow, Wally was part of the crowd that chivalried them, and Wally and his group, right after the reception, took Brent down to Bloomington, which was then just a dirt trail along the Virgin River, and there was nothing there but the farms, the Larson farms, whatever. And they took Brent's shoes off and left him in Bloomington. This is their wedding night. And they thought they were playing quite the trick. And so they left him there for a while. And then they went back and said, okay, long enough, let's go get him and bring him back to St. George. Well, unbeknownst to them, as soon as they left, Brent started hoofing it back to St. George. And he walked on that gravel road in socks to get back to Dion, to get back to their honeymoon. But Wally made a great effort to make it a special experience.
So, Jay, this is amazing. Well, we've done, I think, 53 episodes of this podcast, and this is the first time the word chivalry has come up. And I'm so glad it has, because I've heard about this all my life. I didn't experience it myself, but I've heard about it all my life. And that's a classic example
It was quite
of that.
popular. My oldest sister, Gwen, had her reception at Uncle Gordon's place there on Tabernacle, First South, And when Gwen got married, she was 28, and her husband, they were going to school. They lived in California, and he was at Berkeley. And he ended up getting his PhD and worked for the CIA for 43 years. He's a serious person. And I'll never forget, in front of Uncle Gordon's, the group was going to chivalry him. And he, in no uncertain terms, says, no, you will not put anything on my car. You will not take me. It's not going to happen. And he put the kibosh on it. But it was a normal thing in that era. It was a normal thing, and sometimes it caused consequences, but everybody meant to do it in good fun. So I felt like I knew Wally, and my mom was good friends with Grace Mathis, Wally's mom. They belonged to the Alice Louise Reynolds book club. And that was not a sophisticated club, but you felt privileged to be a part of that learning experience in St. George with those good women. And I can always remember Grace Mathis calling and sending cards. They were just close knit. They were friends. And so I felt like when I was able to come to St. George through a miracle of miracles, there was a job opening and I got it coming right out of school. I was so thrilled, and I was a bit intimidated. Mert Lovell had been my teacher in high school, and Wally was there in the history department. There was George Feller, Wally Mathis, and Mert Lovell, and you would not have two more different people than a George Feller and a Wally Mathis. And they had offices that connected to the library where I worked. And George was so serious about it all, and Wally and Mert could make a party out of everything, just different personalities. But the thing I remember about Wally is he treated me like an equal. And I was 8 years younger than him, but he always treated me like an equal. And I felt special around Wally. And I think he had that knack of getting down to your level. And I don't know if this is appropriate, but my analogy is he could be very comfortable, but Dick's Cafe with the Lions buddies visiting, or being on the High Council visiting a ward. And he could interact well with all different personalities and backgrounds, and he made no judgments. Wally did not make judgments. As long as you went along with his trickery and his jokes, he was as happy as he could be. But it taught me so much about doing things. We talk about family, and I think that was Wally's mantra. Even at school, we were a family. The Dixie High faculty, they were so tight, and they loved to play tricks. You had the science pod of Walt Cox and Ross Taylor and Harley Iverson, Don Gates, and then you had the history pod, and then you had the English pod with Mary Phoenix and the crew. And they would play tricks or jokes on one another, but they gathered. They were gatherers. And Wally was always in the midst of that. One of the most looked forward to events for us every year was the Pine Valley faculty opening social. And we'd go up to Pine Valley and we'd get the Enterprise corn, and Wally was in charge of the Dutch oven potatoes. There was one way to do Dutch oven potatoes, and Wally was the chef on the Dutch oven potatoes. And I remember what an honor I felt when he invited me to help participate in the Dutch oven potatoes at our fall social. But like everybody made a great effort with their spouses to be to the Pine Valley party. And we had parties on a regular basis, and everybody was a family. Another thing I remember about Wally was his wonderful wife, Charlene. She was the rock that I think kept Wally a little bit tied to reality. Whether he was out at the ranch or whether he was on fire duty at Black Rock or whatever it is, Charlene was the constant at home. And the thing I look forward to every year again is Charlene would make taffy, pull taffy, the white taffy that you just sucked on. And they made the long strands, and you cut it into pieces, and then you just sucked on it. And every year around Christmas time, Wally would bring trays of taffy to Dixie High School to share with the faculty in the faculty room. And again, I always felt special because he would bring me an extra pile for my office because he knew I loved his wife's taffy. And they opened up their home. Here again, I was somewhat younger, but I remember going to their New Year's Eve parties of his group and making me feel included. He was very inclusive. And one other thing I remember is pomegranates. A lot of people think of pomegranates as just trash food and they grow anywhere wild, whatever. But I treasured pomegranates, and Wally would bring me in the fall. You had big pomegranate bushes in the backyard by the barn. And
From Switzerland. The shoots that's where they got
they were from Switzerland.
those pomegranates.
Well, they were unbelievably sweet, good pomegranates. And the thing I love to do with those pomegranates, I don't know if you've ever just taken a bowl of pomegranates and peeled them, put a little sugar and milk on them with a piece of toast, and that was probably the finest supper I could ever have. And then next to that would be the Dixie salad that you would make with the pomegranates. And Wally was the supplier for me before we were able to get ours growing and going for pomegranates. And so to me, the school was family. And it got interrupted in 1984 when Pineview High School came online. The district tried, and they were wonderful, good people at the district, but they tried to assign people to leave Dixie. And it created a row, a big row. In fact, some of these teachers said, when I signed a contract to teach at Dixie High School, and you can't make me leave and go to the new high school. And some hard feelings resulted. And of course, Wally's sidekick and best buddy, Merton Lovell, was sent to Pineview. And in the science department, we had Walt Cox go to Pineview, Harley Iverson go to Pineview.
Hob Christian went.
And Hob Christian, math department, went, and Hob was brokenhearted. And I don't know that this caused his death, but the first week of school, when Pineview opened, he died in bed asleep. And he was so heartbroken to leave that Dixie family. And the district learned a lot after that experience. From then on, they allowed the teachers to volunteer to go as the new schools opened and not try to separate. But that made it extra hard because Dixie High School was such a family and they'd been together. And in those early years, there weren't a lot of new teachers come in. And everybody had their personalities. And you could tease them and maybe belittle them a little bit.
Some you could tease.
Some better than others. But I know that kind of shifted for Dixie High School when the new high school opened up in St. George.
Jay, that's really indicative of what the whole community was going through during those years. Yeah. And we've hopefully transcended that by now, but still what you're describing as that nucleus of Dixie High teachers is something so special. And I can relate to it because every teacher that you've named is a teacher that I interacted with, and they were great. You were great, Jay and Doug, and all of those that you named were great. And I think that's why so many of us in this generation, this baby boomer generation, we just feel that connection to Dixie High School and that love and that spirit that you've just described. And I want to come back to you, Jay, because I know you've got a lot to share, but Doug, tell us who Wally Mathis was.
Well, the thing for me is that when I started teaching at Dixie High, I was under contract out in 71. But my last 2 years of college, I was at SUU. And I drove back and forth every day with 3 other people from St. George to get our degree. And so Walt ended up having me coach with him and Wally and Mert starting in 69. And we coached the varsity and the sophomores, but Wally and I kind of had the sophomores more than anything. But to kind of add to what was just said, when I started teaching, Dixie High School was 500 students. That's the total amount of students that we had. And so when you had the program there, like our football program, I know those coaches from up north and places where they'd come down to play us, they said, when you go to play Dixie, because of and I say it's because of the love of everybody and the faculty and the staff and all the kids in the school, you're coming down one touchdown behind before you even get on the field because of we call it the Dixie spirit. And it was just, the whole town was there for the ball games in the old Sun Bowl, which is now being remodeled. All the fathers would stand up on the sides and follow the football all the way around the stadium to make sure they didn't miss something. And so you were just involved completely, students, faculty, everyone. And the thing with Wally is he enjoyed that very thing. I know I had one experience with a father. He came up to me during practice. His son was a cornerback, good kid, not a very big kid, but he wanted his son to play middle linebacker. And Wally was standing there, and he just listened. I said, well, if we put him at linebacker, I got to use a couple of names here. Kenny Thompson, who everyone knows as half-track, because his dad was Tank Thompson, and Lynn Stokes was the other tackle. And I said, you got Lynn and Kenny, half-track, and I said, they're going to be hitting him. You just got to remember that. And if you want him to play linebacker, that's fine. Well, let me think. And Wally just stepped up, and he says, hey, look, pick your side. You want half-track to hit him? You want Lynn to hit him? Or what do you want to do? Let's make a damn decision here. And the guy, well, I think I'll leave him at cornerback. So Wally pretty well that's the way Wally was. He was a cowboy. Those are cattle. These are football players, and we're going to talk to them.
Later on in life, I think he was coaching JV at this point when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And I heard him on the phone, one of the landlines, and he'd answered the phone after school. And he wasn't grumpy at home, but he had a grumpy voice on that day. So I was a little kid, and I was snooping, and I was listening in. And I heard him say, your kid doesn't play because your kid isn't good enough to play. And if you ever want to come and see how hard he doesn't work, we'll be at practice every day after school.
And that's Wally.
And that pretty much ended the...
Yeah. Hey, Wally would just tell it like it is. You didn't have to worry about it being sugar-coated. I was trying to be nice and just explain how football worked. But Wally got a lot more done a lot quicker than I did. So that part of it was great. And to work with him, I remember in the faculty lounge, one of the lady teachers left her keys we had mailboxes. And all of a sudden those keys turned up missing. And there was I don't know if there was a note sent to her or what, but if there was a pie in the faculty room the next day, the keys would probably appear. And it did, and so did they. So that was the kind of staff you had. It was great.
Now, there's one constituency we don't have represented here, and that's students.
Yes.
Although I could be one, except that I never did get to have Wally as a teacher. I had Mr. Feller for history, and I had Mert, but I never got to Wally. And so maybe you can, Mandy, maybe you can help us understand or either the two of you, what was it like in his classroom?
Well, my daughter was his aide, and I guess it's okay to tell this story, but she would work with him during his class time, and he'd had a girl in his class, and I don't know what to point the disruption or talking she did to create a problem, but he really didn't like it. And so he told her when the class came in, he'd threatened her, I guess, a few times to quit talking. And finally he called my daughter, he called her Drake. That's normal. You called everybody by their last name or a nickname. But he said, Drake, take that yardstick and go down and stand by her. And if she talks, hit her on the head with it. Now, I don't know if she talked. She said she never got hit. Whether that curbed it at all, I don't know. But I think he ran a pretty tight ship in his classroom.
Pretty tight ship, but there's probably a lot of humor as well.
Oh, yeah. That was Wally. He loved the kids. That was one thing. He loved the kids. He loved the kids he worked with. He loved the kids he coached. And everything was great, but he would tell you exactly what was and what wasn't.
So, Mandy, these two gentlemen are sharing these qualities and characteristics of your dad. Where did those characteristics come from?
When I was reading the family history, apparently Wallace Brigham Mathis was a little bit of a jokester. And so when I read that about him, that brought to mind maybe the prankster in my dad. And I definitely saw that. I was in his classroom. He kicked me out once for talking. I didn't get the yardstick, but I got the look.
We do have the student protector.
Yeah, I was talking, and he kicked me out. And I said, well, can I have $5? I'll go to Cash Saver and get a drink. And so he pulls out his wallet, and he comes back, and he hands me the $5. And I knew it was a funny joke once. I knew that I wouldn't do that again, that next time I would just be quiet. But it was a good spectacle for that day. But he was a fun teacher. He was when you talk about putting people on your level, I was surprised at how engaging he was to a high school student to talk about things. I had him for sociology and for history, but to be very open and ask their opinion on things and get them to think. And he was a back row sitter at church for a while, and he would grade his papers back there. I'd read my Lulu Lamar books, and he would grade his papers. And if somebody we'd make the threshold of what was a good score out of 100, and if it was a good score, I'd put a star on it, or I'd draw a smiley face and write a note to his kids that because he had all these things printed off. But very fun teacher. He wasn't a big man, and there was a fight that broke out in the hall, and he had a stick. It was somebody had given him some samurai stick, and he went out and he would just poke one and move him back, and he'd poke the other because he wasn't getting in the middle of it. He's too smart, but they just poked him in the stomach until they stopped fighting from about 6 feet away. I thought it was genius, but he was a character in that way.
When you say he wasn't a big man, your grandpa wasn't either.
Mm-mm.
Reed was small in stature, but very effective physically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my dad's always told me that the best cowboys he knew were not big men. They were men who knew how to take care of situations, not using their physical size or strength. And I think that's what I was describing about my memory of your grandpa, is how he efficiently and competently completed a task, even though he wasn't large in stature. And I think that's what you're describing about your dad. He wasn't going to go in there and knock everybody down, but he was going to take care of the situation.
Got them separated.
Back then, we used to have D Week. It was Dixie Week. And so the first Monday of that week, we always had the bucket run. And that bucket run was a challenge to set a new record over the seniors from the year before. And so they'd run from the high school clear up through and up onto the Sugarloaf where the Dixie is. And then all of we call them Diamond D people, they were the seniors that had worked really hard and made the Diamond D Club. And there was usually, 10 to 15, something like that. And they were the ones that we buckled up and tied ropes to and hung down over the edge to paint the Dixie. And Wally always enjoyed doing that. I was always up there helping hold the ropes and stuff like that, but we did have them anchored so there was not a chance of slipping. But he'd always on some of the kids, I don't know if they were kids from his class or something, that he'd keep a little bit of a coil out. So we'd get them down over the edge, and then he'd yell, grab that rope, it slipped, and then he'd drop it. So they'd drop about a foot. You could hear him screaming probably all over St. George. church.
Doug, I was one of those kids. I was a Diamond D recipient, and I was lowered over that edge by my father, who had that joke still in his repertoire at that point.
Well, glad you got to
Yeah,
enjoy that.
you just unleashed a little trauma in me that I think I'd quite repressed until you just really, but it was a pretty funny one.
Maybe it was time that
It was time to get it
finally came
released.
out.
Yeah, that was funny. I'm glad you brought that up, actually.
That is awesome. Andy, Jay mentioned earlier your mom, and tell us a little about your mom because that's such an important part of this story.
Oh, yeah, there's no Wally without Charlene. So, talking about generational things, one of the few stories that my dad would talk about his youth that I heard him retell on more than one occasion was he and my grandpa were out and they were on horseback and they were ready to go back to the ranch house. And my dad flippantly said to my grandpa, "Let's go see what the old woman has for us for dinner." And he started off on his trot. And he started going, and I guess my grandpa came up to him side by side with the horse, grabbed his reins, and about bucked him off. And he said, "You will call her mother, or you will call her mom, but you'll never refer to your mother as an old woman." And he said, "Message received." And that was a standing theme at our house that I think we could have got away with a lot, except for looking at my mom cross-eyed. Like, he never said it, and the siblings have talked about it, but that was the line, is you did not disrespect your mom. And I personally never have. My brother Dustin, I guess he was watching football before it was time to go to church, and my mom had called for him to go get ready for church, and I think he ignored her. And then my mom called for him to go again, and he said, "I'll go in a minute," and talked back to her, and I guess my dad was listening. And when my brother got up, and my dad, he never spanked us, never anything, but he kicked my brother in the butt with his foot. And to send a message that was not okay. And I guess they came home from church with my dad's foot elevated with ice on it, because my brother wasn't a fleshy person at the time, and they thought he broke his foot on it. And honestly, if that happened, if any of you know my brother Dustin, that would be well deserved. But I think that was the only time we just knew it was not an okay thing. Is we did, and we still don't. We do whatever she says.
You, my wife, she's from Enterprise too.
Okay.
And your mom was from Enterprise, and my wife thinks that Charlene is probably one of the greatest people. She's just a really great lady, and we've known them forever. When the dam broke out here at Quail, we were at a New Year's Eve party over there. Mert had that little grocery store over on Sunset and Valley View, and we were celebrating in there and playing board games and stuff. And Janet Webb, who was also a staff member at Dixie, was a part-time sheriff or police department, and she came in and said, "Hey, the dam's broke." It was like 12 or 1 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And they knew we lived out at Bloomington Hills because of the old bridge. And she said, "If you need to go, you better go down around through Bloomington because we don't know if it's got to the bridge yet." And so Wally just looked up and said something like, "Thanks for ruining a good New Year's Eve party," or something. And then we took off. But that was the thing with when you were involved with Wally and his wife and anyone else around, it was just a great experience. You enjoyed yourself. Everybody laughed and joked. And he cussed me one time because I think we were playing Pictionary or something where you get a question and if you can answer it. But anyway, I had been with the Air Force Reserve, and we'd had to fly overseas, and we'd landed in Shannon, Ireland. And while we were there, we had 4 hours, and there's the river that went right by there. And Wally read the question, something to the effect, what river or something runs through this little burg? Well, I knew it was the Shannon River. I said, "That's the Shannon River." And he, "How did you know that?" And I just told him, "Hey, smart."
Yes, that's right.
But those were the kind of, you just never, it wasn't a dull time any time when you were working with Wally. One way or another, it was exciting.
That's awesome.
And with your mom, she's just a great lady.
She tamed him for sure.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I have to give her credit.
And speaking of that, Mandy, your dad, if he'd have had his druthers, he probably would have just been out on the strip. Your place out there, you still have that place. It's so awesome. I've been there many times. I've even been there when your dad was there, and it was those are the ones I remember the most. But tell us about that heritage out there and what that meant to him.
So when he was young, he would go out there all the time with my grandpa and do that. And then when he ended up teaching school, he went out with the BLM in the summers, every summer, and fought fires and worked on Mount Trumbull. And again, I found out family heritage. They were going out to Mount Trumbull to get lumber for the temple, and my dad loved Black Rock and he loved Trumbull and going out there. And then when he was able to retire, he spent a lot of time out there. That I think that was his place, that I think he found his greatest happiness. And my grandparents, that was a special place for them. And when Jay was talking about the Dutch oven, they would have their friends come out and there'd be big groups. And my grandpa would say, you get 9 people around a fire and you're going to have 10 opinions on how to do the Dutch oven, but I'm going to tell you the right way. And he taught me the right way. And I don't think I even possibly physically could do it the wrong way at this point. Like, it's so ingrained in me that there is a right way to do that. But there was a lot of family memories that I get so pleased seeing my nieces and nephews take their families out. My brothers and sisters really enjoy going out there still, and it's quite a place.
It's so wonderful that that's all public land, and it's all basically been subsumed into Grand Canyon, and yet the Mathises still have that little, is it a quarter second?
160 acres, quarter.
That is white on the map, and your house is there, and that place is there. It gives me comfort knowing that's there. It's really special. And as I look at Jay and Doug here, you have that same legacy of your ancestors being stalwarts here in the community, but also being cowboys out on the range, whether it's the Arizona Strip or out towards Pipe Spring or out in Nevada.
Mountain Meadows.
Mountain Meadows with the Lytles, Doug. And that's something that's really, most people wouldn't really understand that. But these pioneers that came to St. George, they were here and they were devoted to the community, but they also were out being productive on the range somewhere really quite far away.
So after my dad retired, he'd been teaching and doing all these things. He didn't thrive in retirement. My mom told him to go get a job because he was used to working all the time. And so he and Daryl Hafen went and got a full-time job together.
And they had been teachers in the district.
They'd been teachers and friends since Daryl Hafen, he was my dad's best man at his wedding. And that friendship had endured the rest of their lives. So, and even during their reception, Daryl was goofing off and broke one of the glass doors at the church, which sounds like Daryl. And then they had the chivalry, which, from my understanding, is just pretty much a kidnapping. But my mom and dad were being kidnapped by their friends, and they got reunited later. That was up in Enterprise, and they got reunited about 1 a.m. the next morning. And they did get reunited because my sister was born about 9 months later. So they were reunited. But Daryl and my dad had this long-standing relationship and friendship for their whole lives. And so when they retired, they got this part-time job at a gas station. The one would work 20 hours, the other would work the other 20. And then they got cows together. And they'd spend all day together either working, and then they would run home and call each other on the phone and talk about their day. It was just such a fantastic friendship for them to have, and to have that. You think they're friends for 75 years. You've seen everybody through their best and their worst at that point, is to have that type of friendships.
And that's really saying something, to be partners in cattle and still be friends, too.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And
An interesting thing, Wally and Mert had come in for football. When we used to start early. We'd start 2 weeks before school started. And we'd be talking. He said, yeah, well, we knew school was going to start, so we'd stand on rocks and we'd read books really loud so our voices would be ready for the kids when they got here the first day.
I come back to what Jay said about these pods, and that history pod was something else. Was there ever a group of high school history teachers quite like that group?
Well, I don't know how they coexisted, honestly. They were so very different, and yet they did. George was so serious and focused, and
Maybe that's why I really got into history, because I was in his serious, focused class.
yes, the world history class. He would use our media a lot in terms of getting pictures out of the books and making slides. George was more into that. Wally taught from his mind, as I remember. He didn't need notes, and he didn't need new videos, new films. He just taught history that he knew so well, and he was willing to answer kids' questions, engage them, but they were just different personalities, very different. And it was just a joy. There was never one day in my life that I didn't love going to work. So I went into administration.
that'll do it.
Well, and there again, you have this fellow who at heart is a cowboy, but he's here in town teaching high school students history.
And I had a opportunity because by the time he was done coaching, I wasn't even an accident at that point. And a few years ago, Coach Monkers at the high school and Coach Sharp and Coach Tate invited my dad to go back and speak the Thursday night before the Friday Cedar game and give some perspective on that rivalry. And so they had the team in an auditorium, and they wanted me to come and introduce him because I'm over on the sidelines at the Dixie High School games. They said, introduce your dad, and then he can tell a little bit about that history of the rivalry and things like that. And so it was fun for me to see him address a football team because I'd never seen that side of him. That's why we wanted not just his kid's perspective, but his peers' perspectives. And to see him talk to him, he almost took on this different persona. And all of a sudden it was Coach Mathis again. And it was funny. And you would have had a lot of editing to do with that little rallying cry with your swear word free podcast. But it was fun to see him in that realm. And that's what I've come to understand a little bit is that he has he had his Dick's Cafe people, and he had his high school people, and he had his Arizona Strip people, and his Lions Club people. And I have all these people that once they say, oh, wait, are you related to Wally Mathis? I'm all, quite a bit. And they'll say, you would never believe them all. I'm going to believe whatever you tell me next. And everybody has a story of an interaction, and that was him. It was memorable one way or the other. He left an impression there.
That was one of the toughest days Wally ever had, was the days that we played Cedar in football. He'd almost get completely sick to his stomach. That was almost one of those things where if Cedar beat you, you're going to have to move out of town type things. And there was times I thought, we're going to have to call an ambulance and haul him out of here because he's not going to make it. But that was Wally. He just wanted everybody in the community to know how much and how important this community is and how much we have to put forth. A community just doesn't happen. It's the people, it's the schools, it's whoever that has to make the community be what it is. And I think that was the big thing with Pineview when it opened. All of a sudden, now we're a split community because now you're not 100% behind here. There's some over here too. And there's still, you were teaching some of the same kids. And even when Snow Canyon opened, we had kids coming to Snow Canyon Middle School that when they got through, some would be playing in Snow Canyon the next year, some would be playing in Pineview, and some would be playing in Dixie for their sophomore or junior year till they could make all the changes. Yeah. So it was tough. I had a struggle when they opened Pineview, I have to tell you, because I felt like it tore some of the spirit out of you.
Yeah. And that's understandable, and it's part of what we've all been going through for
Oh, yeah.
30 or 40 years. And yet we can still come together in a little studio like this and feel the Dixie spirit in a powerful way.
It was a golden age, honestly.
Yeah.
That was a golden age. The history of Dixie and the community support, where there wasn't one seat left in the gym. They packed the gym, the football games, the Sun Bowl. They supported Dixie High School. They were connected to Dixie High School. And I think that was a golden age, the Wally Mathis age.
And I've run into Jay at some Desert Hills games, and I've had nieces and nephews go to different schools that you cheer for the kid and wherever they're at, but you can still bring that spirit wherever you're going. Like your kid plays like he could have, like that his grandpa was from Dixie, like he's a good kid, and so some of that stuff transcends.
What you're saying, Mandy, at least to me, is that Dixie transcends Dixie High School.
Right.
Yeah.
And it transcends what was Dixie College. That Dixie is
Right.
this
Community.
area, this community.
It is.
And you can be a Pine View Panther or a Crimson, what are Crimson?
Mustangs.
That's where I have granddaughters there. But you are still from Dixie.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is Dixie.
Yes.
And that's part of what we hope to maintain is just that original Dixie spirit in our entire community. And even though we have different neighborhoods, we have different high schools, we have different communities, but it's all still Dixie. And I think that in every neighborhood, you can have that same kind of spirit that we had back then.
Oh, definitely.
Yep.
And
I know I've had grandkids playing at Crimson and Desert Hills, and my son's at Desert Hills now as an athletic director. And I go out there and I think this is a totally changed thing, but you can see in the kids and you can see in the people that it's still St. George. It doesn't matter what team goes up north to play in a state championship. It's the Southern Utah, St. George, Dixie people that are playing. So that's who we want to win. It's not, hey, I don't like Crimson. We'll have them beat those guys from up north type thing. It's we're
anything
behind
beneath the
everybody
Iron
that's from
County
here.
line.
Wally Mathis embodies all these things that we're talking about. What I feel bad about is that our time is up here. We could go on and on. There's so many things I'd love to talk about, and there's so many other podcasts that we could pull out of this. Doug, you and your family and your heritage, and Jay, the Andrus family, what all that means to St. George. And Mandy, you're awesome. There's so many wonderful aspects of this community that we could talk about. Maybe we can just have a parting shot from each of you regarding Wally.
Well, I think if you look at the Dixie spirit, Wally was the main shot. He was the guy because area between him and Walt and Mert, hey, I just got to hang on to their shirt tails, and I learned a lot from all three of them. But it was a great experience for me.
Wally was a friend. I loved Wally and the fact he gave everything. He was always at the forefront of contributing. Wally was a contributor.
And I think his love for community is passed on to his generations, his kids, his grandkids, that they feel like there's a sense or a need to give back. There's a lot of takers in the world. And I think he'd be pretty disappointed if we weren't trying to be givers. And even his evolution throughout his life, I think he was probably a little bit of a ruffian. I think, like you say, my mom probably reformed him in a lot of ways. And I came home from my mission. He was on the High Council, and I just couldn't believe it. And he gave great talks. And I asked him, I said, Dad, you look like you're going to leave a puddle up there when you're talking. I said, you taught high school for 30 years. But he would prepare. It was so important for him to be well prepared. I caught him over at his little place over in Santa Clara, over by the Rosenbrooks place. He had some cows over there, and I was over quail hunting, and he didn't hear me. And he was given his high council talk to the cows so he could time it, so he'd get the timing down. And I snuck up behind him, and I shot that shotgun in the air. It about put him out of his jeans, but I just thought, who is this man that's timing his church talks now? And I thought, if I was a cow having a rookie high councilman practice their talks on me, I'd be begging to get slaughtered. But probably softened the blow. But I look at my dad's evolution and how sweet he is with his grandkids, and just took all the edges off of him. And I think that's an important part too. So thank you for letting me share.
Oh, Mandy, I regret that we couldn't have Wally right here with us, but we've got you. Yeah. And what you just shared and the way you shared it is your dad. And
for better or worse.
It's pretty special. It's really special, and I feel so grateful to have had this time with you today, Mandy. Thank you. And Jay and Doug, my goodness, this is awesome. An all-star cast today for our podcast. I just thank each of you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. The hot winds whirl around me and take away my breath. I've had the chills and fever till I'm nearly shook to death. All earthly tribulations are but a moment here. And oh, if I prove faithful, a righteous crown I'll wear. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. I hope that there's a heaven with rivers pure